for joining today's webinar. Bonsoir tout le monde, hamjambo mabibi na mabwana. And today we are going to look into the matters of democracy in Africa and what this means to the African people, considering we've had military coups in quite a number of African countries. And so with us, we have quite an amazing panel to talk to us about the same. And this is also going to be one of those sessions that we get to speak our mind, because all contributions are equally important. And we would like for all of you to give us your context, and for us to know what is really happening within your region. My name is Anne Rose Osamba, commonly known as Anne Maua, and I'm the regional organizer for East African Engagement for Africans Rising. And we have an amazing team of panelists from all over the countries that we are discussing about. And I love the fact that we have quite other people who also come from different parts of Africa. So you are free to use the chat box. Kindly write your name and where you're connecting from. Let us know what you think about the current happenings or what suggestions you have. And we are going to start now, and I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. So we have Dr. Wada Nafio from Niger, and he has a PhD in geography, and he served as the general rapporteur of the Independent National Electoral Commission for the Niger until the 26th of July. And we have the amazing Ms. Denise Ayebere from Uganda. And we also have with us Ms. Astrid Mezang from Gabon. And so this amazing panel are going to help us really unpack what is really happening to the African continent. And should it matter to us, please do tell us, feel free to tell us whether this matters to us. But right about now, I'm going to invite the movement coordinator for Africans Rising Movement for Peace, Dignity and Justice to give his opening remarks, and then we can start the session after he gives the remarks. Mr. Hadi Yakubu, you have the floor. Hadi, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, and good afternoon.
Great. Good afternoon.
Greetings to everyone. And welcome to this very important discussion. I think we are all witnesses to the level of sensitivity that we have seen across the continent in terms of our need for ethical governance, responsive governance, and governance that delivers to the needs of the people in terms of its democratic credentials, its peaceful nature, and participatory frameworks. But over the last few years, a lot of happenings in the political scene in terms of the incursion of the military into the governance of several of our states, which has become a serious point of discussion. And we have come here today to have that conversation, to evaluate amongst ourselves as African peoples, whether what does this mean for us? What are the implications of the military incursions into governance for the African people's revolution? How do the African people, take charge of our destinies and be able to see to it that our resources are used largely for the interest of Africans, rather than what we've seen over the years regarding the exploitative tendencies of certain foreign actors whose interest it is always to exploit our resources and have us and have us begging for charity. So today is a very important discussion. Thank you all for joining. We have seasoned panelists who have every confidence will do justice to the topic. And we will leave here very convinced as to what are the next steps for African people in terms of how we take charge of our destiny and recalibrate the exploitation of our resources in a way that benefits African people rather than those outside. And what are these military, what are the implications of these military incursions into governance regarding this building the Africa that we want. So thank you all for joining. We also bear in mind the historical context of how the military have fared in the past in terms of the overthrow that happened of many civilian governments in the 1960s. Are we going back to the 1960s? What is different now, and how do we make sure that we are making moves that inure to the benefit of Africans? So let me stop here, and then Anne, you can go ahead with the moderation, and you and your panelists, I hope, would do justice to the topics, and we would leave here having significant clarity as to what are some of the things that we ought to do to achieve the Africa we want. So thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Bienvenue, Hadi. Thank you so much for the opening remarks. And I think it's a good point to start from and to begin to ask ourselves whether we are actually achieving the correct balance. Because I think if you look at the African continent, then in many countries, or rather in some countries, we have the traditional ways of governance, for example, the monarchies, but we have those of us who upgraded and said, you know what, we want to borrow from constitutions of Russia, we want to borrow from constitution of Britain, of USA. And so at some places we have a mixture, other places we have, traditional ways, like the Swaziland, Lesotho, to name them. So I think this is a good place to start and even begin to ask ourselves, what does democracy really mean? Is it just democracy in terms of our political conversations or political engagement, or socially, economically? And what impact does this have as well? And then in the recent past, we witnessed quite a number of coups d'etats for quite a number of countries. And this is not something new, like Hadi put it. In the 60s, we had the same things. And at least the recent one were almost up to 7, others unsuccessful, others not successful. But then what does this mean to us? Is it a good or a bad thing? And I think with us this evening to discuss is the amazing panel that I introduced to you before. And we will give the opportunity to Dr. Wada Nafiu to just first of all tell us what is the current context in Niger, and then tie it up in terms of what implication does the context give to the people of Niger. So Dr. Wada Nafiu, I would like to give you the floor. I don't know which language you want to express yourself in. Tu parles anglais, or you want to express yourself in French?
Je parle français. Et j'ai combien de minutes, s'il vous plaît?
Oui, ok.
Tu as presque, je peux dire, 5 minutes pour la première intervention.
D'accord.
Okay.
Okay, c'est bon?
So, and now you need to switch to the English channel, and please. So, Serge, you can also switch.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Maurice. Dr. Wada, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Ok, merci. Je tiens à remercier sincèrement l'initiateur de cette conférence qui nous permet de partager bien de choses que nous connaissons actuellement au Niger avec beaucoup de confrères africains. Donc, par rapport au Niger, nous pouvons dire depuis l'ère démocratique, nous assistons au 4e coup d'État. Il y avait eu le premier coup d'État en 96, le deuxième en 99, le troisième le 18 février 2010 et nous assistons au 4e le 26 juillet 2023. Et donc, les 3 coups d'État précédents, juste après ce coup d'État, les militaires qui avaient renversé le régime démocratiquement élu par la suite, ils ont été reçus par la France ou bien ils ont été appuyés dans la mise en œuvre de leur transition au Niger. C'est vérifié de tous. Aujourd'hui, nous vivons une situation très différente qui est juste après le coup d'État, la junte qui a pris le pouvoir a demandé le départ de la base française qui se trouve à Niamey, au cœur de la capitale du Niger. Et cette base française a jusqu'à 1500 militaires. 1500 militaires à Niamey. Donc, voilà, une fois le coup d'État, il demande le départ parce que cette base est installée au Niger pour lutter contre l'insécurité. Ils ont tous les moyens sophistiqués, ils ont tous les équipements nécessaires pouvant aider nos militaires à combattre le terrorisme qui sévissent au niveau des zones de 3 frontières, à savoir le Burkina, le Bénin et le Niger. Mais malheureusement, nous avons constaté que malgré la présence de ces bases françaises, à savoir la France, même les États-Unis, qui a une base aussi au Niger, il y a les Allemands, il y a les Italiens, c'est-à-dire presque l'Union européenne et les Américains, tous ont des bases au Niger, mais particulièrement la France, même à Niamey. Mais malgré tout cela, l'insécurité continue. Et c'est ce qui a poussé les militaires à renverser le régime du président Bazoum le 26 juillet 2023. Maintenant, ce que le peuple nigérien est en train de suivre, est en train de faire de la pression pour que la France accepte de retirer sa base. Mais la France refuse de retirer sa base, ce qui fait en sorte que la société civile nigérienne a créé un camp de résistance à la porte de l'escadrille qui héberge la base française. Et aussi, les militaires au pouvoir au Niger ont demandé le départ de l'ambassadeur de la France qui refuse toujours de quitter le Niger. Et à cela s'ajoute, malheureusement, les sanctions de la CEDEAO et la menace de la CEDEAO pour une intervention militaire au Niger. Et quand vous essayez de voir, en Afrique de l'Ouest, quand même, c'est le 4e coup d'État, en Guinée, au Burkina, au Mali, c'est seulement au Niger que la CEDEAO est toujours derrière une intervention militaire. C'est ce que les Nigériens ne comprennent pas. Un premier aspect. Et par rapport aux sanctions, je vous avoue, actuellement, nous n'avons pas l'électricité. C'est un système de délestage qui se fait 3 heures par quartier. Quand on coupe, il faut 3 heures pour ramener dans votre quartier. Actuellement, de là où je me trouve, c'est coupé depuis 14 heures, on attend le retour. Donc, c'est une sanction que l'UMOA a demandé à la CEDEAO d'appliquer au peuple nigérien. Mais cette sanction, ce n'est pas sur les militaires, mais plutôt malheureusement sur la population civile. C'est sur la population civile et sur les secteurs publics, les secteurs privés. Et tout ça là, c'est pour parler de conséquences de la prise de pouvoir des militaires dans nos pays. Quand on essaie de prendre la prise de pouvoir des militaires dans un pays, c'est un recul de la démocratie. Certes, le régime civil installé, souvent, il y a question de la malgouvernance, il y a question de l'impunité et autres. C'est ce qui fait en sorte que souvent les militaires font irruption au niveau de la scène politique. Mais cette irruption des militaires au niveau de la scène politique, pour le cas du Niger, en tout cas, toutes les transitions que nous avons connues n'ont pas lancé les jalons d'un développement durable au Niger. Parce qu'il y avait même une transition de 99 qui a été même incapable de payer les salaires de fonctionnaires. Et aujourd'hui, au Niger, il y a une véritable tension de la trésorerie. Donc, ce qui fait en sorte que les sanctions, ce n'est pas particulièrement sur les militaires, mais plutôt c'est sur les populations civiles. Donc, du coup, le respect des droits humains, à savoir le droit de circulation, d'abord, les gens sont paniqués parce que toujours il y a la CEDEAO qui menace d'intervenir pour faire quitter les militaires qui ont pris le pouvoir. Donc, chacun, il y a la restriction des circulations. Quand même, à Niamey, les gens évitent certains coins parce qu'on ne sait pas quand est-ce cette intervention, c'est vrai, ce n'est pas vrai, quand est-ce ça va intervenir. Il y a une psychose au niveau de la population civile. Maintenant, au niveau des fonctionnaires, il n'y a pas un rendement par rapport au travail parce que les gens ne viennent pas. Même ici, quand vous venez au travail, il n'y a pas l'électricité qu'aujourd'hui, quand même, le travail se base sur l'informatique et sur la connexion. Et que si vous n'avez pas l'électricité, la connexion de temps en temps est coupée. Donc, vous voyez, on ne peut pas faire un travail pour le développement. Maintenant, à cela s'ajoute aussi la liberté d'expression qui est plus ou moins étouffée parce que actuellement, il y a certains internautes qui sont à garde à vue, certains sont sous mandat de dépôt à la prison civile de Niamey pour leur écrit que l'agent au pouvoir estime que ce qu'ils ont écrit, il y a des problèmes par rapport à ça, ils sont en train d'être écoutés. Donc, vous voyez actuellement ce que la situation que la population nigérienne traverse suite aux événements du 26 juillet 2023. Et je rappelle que c'est pour la première fois que ce genre de pratiques arrive au niveau de notre pays, dans la mesure où le coup d'État précédent, quand même, la CEDEAO n'a pas imposé ce genre de sanctions économiques et énergétiques et que aussi la CEDEAO n'a jamais brandi une intervention militaire au Niger. Et à cela s'ajoute aussi toujours la France qui refuse de reconnaître qu'il y a un coup d'État au Niger. Toujours, elle calme la légitimité du président Bazoum qui est détenu par la junte et que jusque-là, elle n'a pas signé sa démission et que selon Emmanuel Macron, tant que le président Bazoum n'a pas signé sa démission, il considère que c'est toujours le président Bazoum qui est en exercice. C'est pourquoi l'ambassadeur de France ne quittera pas le Niger. La base française dont les accords ont été signés, selon Macron, avec le président démocratiquement élu, et ils ne quitteront pas aussi. Donc voilà un peu la situation est assez tendue entre la France et le Niger. Donc c'est ça en guise de premier échange que je tiens à partager, avec vous. Mais qu'on retient que quel que soit le mode d'accession au pouvoir, moi je pense que mieux vaut une élection qu'un coup d'État, qu'un putsch, qu'un coup de force, qu'une conquête. C'est l'élection qui confère la légitimité à un pouvoir. Mieux vaut une élection. Et maintenant, au cours peut-être de la deuxième partie, nous allons parler quel type d'élection et par la suite, quel type de gouvernement pour les pays africains parce que la démocratie actuelle, c'est, quand je prends le cas du Niger, c'est une copie-collée de la France, la France, depuis qu'on a commencé, la France est à la 5e République, mais nous sommes champions, nous allons aborder la 8e République. Donc, vous voyez, il y a quand même des interruptions de la conférence nationale au Niger du juillet au novembre 91 à aujourd'hui. Vous voyez, il y a 4 irruptions des militaires sur la scène politique. Mais c'est là, il s'agit juste d'interroger l'histoire sociopolitique du Niger, parce que le Niger a connu son premier coup d'État en 1974, quand le président de l'époque a dit qu'il va rehausser les prix de l'uranium pour qu'il soit rentable au développement du Niger et que les officiers qui ont fait les écoles françaises ont renversé le président Jory. Et ils ont dirigé le pays de 1974 à 1990 où les mouvements sociaux ont demandé la tenue d'une conférence nationale qui, à partir de cette conférence nationale, nous avons basculé vers la démocratisation de notre pays avec les premières élections démocratiques et concurrentielles en 1993. Donc, voilà un peu l'histoire. C'est pourquoi toujours il y a des résistances des militaires sur la scène politique parce qu'ils ont géré de 1974 à 1990. Voilà un peu ce que j'ai dit en guise de la première partie. Merci.
D'accord. Merci, Dr. Wada.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wada. Merci beaucoup pour votre submission. Malheureusement, je parle un peu français, so I would definitely have to go back to English. But thank you so much for contextualizing what is really happening in Niger and even giving the, the history, l'histoire du Niger in terms of coup, and also the implication that brings on the general population. And clearly from your submission, we can tell the ECOSOC rights are already violated. And I know that is a sentiment that has been echoed by some of you in the chat box, because I saw somebody talking about, like one of the rights that has been violated. I would like to send a shout out to one of our matriarchs, Dr. Nyazirai Gobozvada, and thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you can stay till the end of the call, because I think after the speakers, it would be nice to hear your perspective, especially on gender, because you've been working on that. And allow me to now bring to you Ms. Therese Astrid Mezang from Gaborone to also share us the insights. And Ms. Teresa, you have about 7 minutes to give your submission in terms of what is the current context of where you are and the implication this has on the general population. Ms. Astrid, please go ahead.
Alors, bonjour à tous. Je suis Thérèse Astrid de Bonnemezan. Je suis assistant projet au réseau panafricain des jeunes pour la culture de la paix. Donc, je me présente ici en tant que membre du réseau panafricain des jeunes pour la culture de la paix. Alors, le contexte gabonais est différent des autres contextes parce que je ne qualifierais pas ce contexte comme celui du Niger. Le contexte local actuel du Gabon est simplement un contexte transitionnel. Nous sommes aujourd'hui dans une phase de transition démocratique à l'issue de ce que certains appellent un coup d'État, qui qualifie de coup d'État, mais que nous, la population gabonaise, on ne qualifie pas de coup d'État. Nous, la population, on qualifie cette action de l'armée gabonaise comme étant une libération d'un peuple qui a été oppressé depuis 1960, qui a eu à la tête de son État une seule famille. Donc, au Gabon, on était dans une république monarchisée. Par conséquent, je ne peux pas aborder la question de ce coup d'État comme étant comme les autres du Niger, du Mali ou d'autres pays. Et Sur les implications, aujourd'hui, le comité de transition essaye de mettre en place une inclusion de toutes les couches sociales et une inclusion de toutes les franges de la population, aussi bien les opposants, le politique, la société civile. Il faut aussi d'abord bien comprendre que notre coup d'État c'est un coup d'État institutionnel, je répète bien institutionnel, parce que ce n'est pas un coup d'État qui a été fait d'homme à homme, mais c'est le coup d'État qui est un coup d'État fait de l'armée vers les institutions gabonaises qui avaient été tripatouillées, qui avaient été gérées par un seul État, par une seule famille, donc l'ex-parti au pouvoir. Donc, notre coup d'État est beaucoup plus institutionnel et social parce que c'est sensiblement le ras-le-bol de la population qui a poussé l'armée à intervenir. Parce que, comme disait le président Jerry Rawlings du Ghana, lorsqu'un peuple subit des injustices de ses dirigeants en complicité avec les juges, l'armée se doit de prendre ses responsabilités. Alors, pour le moment, l'armée a pris ses responsabilités pour libérer son peuple de l'oppression. Et nous, aujourd'hui, sensiblement, toutes les couches sont impliquées, toutes les couches, notamment, comme je disais, toutes les couches de la société. Et aujourd'hui, on est en train de faire simplement ce qu'on appelle la restitution des institutions. Donc, on a vu les institutions antérieures quitter leur position et on a mis d'autres autorités de transition notamment afin de pouvoir gérer la situation gabonaise. Cette transition a été mise en place pour pouvoir remettre d'abord à plat tout ce qui s'est fait depuis 1967 et refaire la constitution gabonaise et emmener la nouvelle constitution qui pourra permettre d'organiser les nouvelles élections au Gabon. Donc, dire que les Gabonais soutiennent le coup d'État, non. On ne va pas dire qu'on soutient, que c'était la meilleure voie, mais on n'oublie pas aussi que le Gabon n'a pas fait preuve que de coup d'État armé, mais le Gabon a fait preuve de coups d'État électoraux, mais cela n'a jamais été, la voix du peuple n'a jamais été respectée. Alors, pour le moment, le peuple a acclamé ce qui s'est fait parce qu'on avait besoin de changer, de quitter de la république monarchisée pour avoir une république démocratique et un président élu par le peuple. Donc, on attend simplement ce qui va se faire durant la transition, la remise à plat des institutions. On attend la nouvelle constitution pour pouvoir organiser les élections démocratiques pour que les Gabonais se retrouvent, reconnaissent les dirigeants qui seront à leur tête, en fait. Moi, je ne m'aventurerai pas sur la question en rapport avec les rapports entre la France et le Gabon. Franchement, je préfère pas m'aventurer dans ça. Parce que pour le moment, nous, les Gabonais, on voulait d'abord sortir d'une situation et ensuite, on verra par la suite comment gérer les rapports, les relations internationales entre nous et les autres pays, notamment la France. Pour l'inclusivité, l'inclusion de l'inclusion des populations, les populations gabonaises ont été incluses lorsque le président de la transition a pris le pouvoir. Il a appelé toutes les forces vives de la nation. Ils ont établi des règles, ils ont mis en place des priorités pour la population. Donc, aujourd'hui, le gouvernement de transition qui a prêté serment il y a moins d'une semaine a pour rôle et but de mettre en place, de mettre en œuvre les priorités nationales. Quelles sont les priorités des Gabonais aujourd'hui? Est-ce que ce sont des priorités d'abord de gérer les relations internationales ou ce sont des priorités sociales? Et les priorités gabonaises sont plus sociales que politiques. Donc, pour le moment, pense que c'est ce que je peux dire au niveau du Gabon, c'est ce qui se passe.
Thank you so much, Merci beaucoup, for highlighting the situation in Gabon and clearly spelling out the differences in terms of when you're making a comparative analysis, maybe between what is happening in Gabon and Mali or Burkina Faso. I mean, clearly we see a lot of differences in terms of the nature in which the coups are taking place. And now I would like to bring in Ms. Ayebare Denise from Uganda. And for you, Ms. Denise, I think your question will be more of how do we actually provide collective solidarity as the rest of the Africans who may not necessarily be affected by the coup, considering your context is very different from the West African context. Ms. Ayebare, could you please go ahead?
Hello, everyone. Just let me know if I'm audible because I was having a little bit of issues. So you can just let me know if
Sorry,
I'm audible.
do you want to add your voice? Do you want to add that? Yeah.
Okay. So just let me know if I'm audible so that then I can begin.
Oui, perfect. Burundinho, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So a good evening from East Africa, and well, so just like about the entire issue of solidarity and everything, how the entire African continent can then have the kind of support, the kind of solidarity that then can exist for us to harness our own resources, but to deal away with things like neoliberalization, neocolonialism, and everything. So I think I should just start by giving a sort of kind of context that even when I'm not based in West Africa, I think all African countries have that kind of shared history. So I think most of the times our politics have become militarized because of the kind of politics or because of the kind of means we used to get our independence. What this looks like, we did not have our own independence through just like by saying France or Britain or any other country is going to wake up and say, oh, wow, you're independent today. The kind of means we used to attain our own independence was through militarization. So right from the beginning, right from the start, the kind of militarization now defined our kind of politics in Africa. That's why we have various coups happening on the continent, because even our history is embedded in things like militarization. But then the second thing why I think that then it becomes very prevalent, and sometimes I tend to sympathize with the kind of governments we have, it's because of the structures that then have been set by things like the World Bank or the IMF. So just a simple context on that too, because around the 1970s, what necessarily happened was after most of the countries had got their independence and were trying to define what they wanted and how they could be governed, the World Bank introduced things like structural adjustment programs. These were countries that were still young. I think in 1970s, the majority of the countries in Southern Africa, like Zimbabwe or South Africa, hadn't got the Black majority rule. But then they went ahead to tell these countries that, you know what, the reason you're poor, the reason you're corrupt, the reason you're what, it's because you do not have things like privatization. So what the African governments did was to retrench majority of the workers to go back and highly privatize. But at that point, majority of the Africans did not have the capacity then to have the private entities, but then to also carry out privatization. What did that mean? One, the kind of investments that we're going to have in the African context were going to be dominated by either our former colonial masters or by either neocolonialism. So the kind of the structures we had, neocolonialism, neoliberalization, that's why we're going to have majority of the multinational companies in Africa being foreign. Because at the point in time that we were introduced to this kind of structured adjustment programs, we were not told exactly what is going to happen. But then in the context of West African countries, West Africa is a hub of resources, from oil to uranium to majority of the resources that then exist in West African countries. what happened for the French colonies like Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso. After independence, they signed the kind of pacts. The colonial French pact, 60% of the profits, the resources were all supposed to be shared with France. So for far too long, even when Niger is the fourth producing country of uranium, it's still among the poorest. Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, that kind of have the resources that exist, are still like very poor and impoverished. What does that necessarily mean? If we are to cut the hub of resources that then goes to Europe, that goes to France, there is no way America, France, or anything would exist without the African continent. The kind of resources, the kind of development, right, from the labor exploitation, but then the resources that are always taken to France or anything, all come from Africa, most especially West Africa. So you find that the people who are going to work hard in Tunisia to produce things like olive, which they're going to tell you, olive oil produced in Italy or made in Italy, are the women who are suffering in Tunisia to produce the kind of olives. Or they're not going to tell you that the kind of flowers that exist in Amsterdam, Sweden, the roses that we usually see that are the very best, come from Africa, and it's the women who suffer then to sort of grow these things. They're not going to tell you the kind of oil that comes from Africa is one of the best qualities. But then as a continent, we are continuously impoverished. And now here comes the question of solidarity. If we are not able, for example, if Niger is going to have a coup to redefine its history, but then also to deal with things like to make sure we do not have things like people's standards of living to improve or anything, and redefine our constitutions and not be under anyone. And then the very first country to cut off the power supply to Niger then becomes Nigeria, guys. Like, on an African context, in an African country where most of the people actually in Niger, actually majority of them are Nigerians, and they're doing the kind of trade, they're doing most of their business in Niger. But then the very first country to do is going to be sort of Nigeria to cut off the power supply. So now here is where we want to understand the question of solidarity. Solidarity on the continent can be given by making sure African problems require African solutions, in terms of having our development to become African, in terms of having ECOWAS for West Africans, or having the African Union for Africans. So this sort of sounds hard because the biggest fund of the African Union is the EU and the World Bank or anything. So the kind of strings attached, the kinds of conditions attached is what we need to do away with. If Africa is to be united and talk about these entire issues of decolonizing the mind and having development that is only for African countries, or a development that is pro-African without strings attached, then it's going to be better. So two ways how individuals, young people can help. One, by showing that innovation cannot only be Western, decolonizing the mind and moving the motion of Africa can develop on its own. If Africa cut the entire supply of resources to the US or France, France wouldn't exist without Africa. That's why for far too long they have continuously engaged themselves in the kind of politics or that are existing and financing the kind of havoc that then happens. Yeah, over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ayebere, for actually, contextualizing everything, but most importantly, relooking at the world of the multinational companies and even speaking into austerity measures and structural adjustment. And we even continue to experience them up to date. Even in my own country, Kenya, I think we still have challenges when it comes to austerity measures and even the language and the politics of language, because even how they are packaged when they are called structural adjustment programs, and you just want to think, oh, it's good English, but you don't know the cost that comes with that in terms of conditions and everything. But most importantly, touching into, what the implication of all this has on women. I think that was really powerful when you talked about the flower farms in Naivasha, when we talked about, all this olive oil and what actually goes into the production and what we see as the end product, and so much power that we have. Asante sana. So I think I would like to open the floor for just one question. And then after that, we can do a set of another round of questions, and then another Q&A, and potentially close the webinar. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. That team will be able to, help me in the event where I can see. And also, as I wait for someone to raise their hand, I would like to give this opportunity to Dr. Nyarazai Gobozvanda for her to just shed some light in terms of the implication of all these coups that are happening in Africa on gender, especially women and children. Dr. Nyarazai, are you able to speak?
Maurice, are you able to grant her permission to talk, please?
I'm not sure whether we still have her on the call. I thought I had seen.
Doctor?
I think she's just written Nyarazai Gombozvada, but if we can't see her yet, we can give an opportunity to those people who have raised their hand. And so Ruben Trinomojuni, I hope I didn't kill your name. You can go ahead. And then after you, we have Adrian Kum. Please keep it 1 minute each so that the two of you both get to speak.
Thank you very much. You actually did mother it. You said it very well. You Trinomojuni from Uganda. Thank you very much, Ayevare, for your contribution. The big problem that we have in Africa is that our colonizers have successfully divided us. The more, if we can be able to unite and do our things ourselves, we will be successful. Don't think Nigeria is trying to fight Niger because they want. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. But if you can know the power that we have and we unite, and for me, I strongly feel that the African Union needs to be felt. I think the way the African Union is handling our matter, maybe because they are also under the influence of their funders. And for me, my cry is that African countries should give their money, their gifts to the African Union. And we do our own thing, we support ourselves, we act as one. When these people are looking at us, they are not looking at Ugandans or they are looking at Africa. And this is how we are. Uniting, acting as one, standing as one, refusing the pressures, we will be able to make. I thank you.
Ruben, I think I lost you. It could be probably your connection. I'm gonna take Adrian in 1 minute, and then I'll come back to you. Adrian Kum, are you able to speak, or you want to type on the chat?
Adrian, you've been given permission. You just need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful initiative, and I would like to thank Ms. Ayebare Dennis for her presentation. I mean, talking about the structural adjustment plan and the World Bank, what this have done to African economies and African politics in general is something commending. And I would like to thank her, and especially on this idea of decolonizing the African mind. That is where I think Africa's problem solution should really come from, decolonizing the African mind. It's very important and imperative. My question goes to the first presenter, Dr. Wada Nafiu, who gave us, I mean, the highlight of what is happening in Niger, and we've all seen that. But I would like to ask him, in his own opinion, what does he think is the reason why France does not want to leave Niger? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. And I would give it to Dr. Wada and a few to respond, but also as I give it to you, Dr. Wada, maybe right after your response, you could also speak into how best do you think movements such as Africans Rising Movement can support the people of Niger, especially in the current context of what is happening. So as you respond to Adrian's question, also kindly speak into that as well, and you have 5 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît. Dr. Wada?
Dr. Wada, tu nous entends?
C'est bon?
Oui. S'il vous plaît.
Donc voilà, j'ai dit je vais répondre très rapidement parce que je vais par la suite me connecter sur mon téléphone comme l'ordinateur est déchargé compte tenu de la coupure de l'électricité. La première question, les raisons pourquoi la France ne veut pas quitter le Niger. Vous savez, j'ai dit il faut interroger l'histoire sociopolitique du Niger. D'abord, la première rébellion après... S'il vous plaît. Allô?
Tu dois muter l'un de tes appareils, je ne sais pas.
C'est bon.
En fait, Dr. Wada, il faut diminuer le volume de l'un des appareils parce que tu t'entends toi-même. C'est ça en fait. Il faut diminuer le volume de l'ordinateur. And
can we go ahead? Okay.
Yeah. So that doctor can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice. Astrid, I think you can go next and tell us what kind of solidarity can we offer, to your people, and also just let us know in terms of what other existing efforts are currently being done.
Alors, quelle solidarité on peut offrir à notre peuple? D'accord, allez-y. Quelle solidarité on peut offrir à notre peuple? Bon, moi je parle pour ce qui est du contexte gabonais, la solidarité, c'est laisser les choses se faire et nous laisser mettre en place toutes les institutions qu'on a destituées et puis voir comment les élections prochaines vont se passer. Aussi, peut-être pas vouloir que le contexte gabonais soit le même que celui des autres. Il est vrai qu'on réclame tous des injustices qui ont été faites par les pays européens. Le Gabon, comme tout autre pays africain, a longuement été pillé pendant des années. On a été réduit à l'esclavage depuis longtemps. Cependant, on ne pourrait pas réagir de la même façon au sortir d'une crise à laquelle on ne s'attendait pas. D'accord? On ne s'est jamais attendu. Mais nous, aujourd'hui, on est beaucoup plus focus sur, on a été libéré d'un régime. Et comme je l'ai dit tantôt, la question de après, qu'est-ce que nous on fait de nos rapports avec la France? On va les aborder forcément. On va forcément les aborder. Ce sont des questions qui forcément vont être au centre des débats au niveau institutionnel, des institutions qui ont été établies. Maintenant, moi, je soutiens et je suis d'avis que lorsque un État traverse une crise, il faut que les pays ou les pays voisins le soutiennent. Et je salue vivement la situation du Niger avec le Mali qui soutient ses frères du Niger et le Burkina Faso. Moi, je salue cette initiative. Ce qui est différent chez nous, en Afrique centrale, je pourrais le dire clairement, que ça ne peut pas être la même parce que nous sommes dans des États où les chefs d'État ont plus de 20 ans au pouvoir. Donc, qu'un militaire vienne déstabiliser un pouvoir de plus de 20 ans, je ne pense pas que ses frères, les chefs d'État de la sous-région qui étaient dans la même situation que le pouvoir qui a été déstabilisé seront d'avis. Parce qu'eux aussi, ils se sentent en danger. Ils se disent que si le coup d'État a commencé au niveau de la sous-région, c'est-à-dire en Afrique centrale, si ça a commencé au Gabon, ça peut impulser les autres coups d'État en Guinée équatoriale, au Cameroun, au Congo, et ainsi de suite. Donc, il vaut mieux que les institutions ou bien les instances internationales qui regardent le Gabon aujourd'hui puissent pouvoir peut-être, je dirais, accompagner la transition qui est en train de se faire et laisser le temps de transition afin qu'on puisse penser à organiser des nouvelles élections démocratiques à notre niveau. Mais pour ce qui est des autres pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest qui ont subi des coups d'État, moi je suis pour qu'on soutienne. Les sanctions ne sont pas bonnes parce que lorsque on se lève, un pays qui est stable où les conditions humaines sont respectées, je ne pense pas qu'une junte va se lever pour détrôner un bon dirigeant, je ne pense pas. Mais s'il y a déstabilisation dans un pays d'un dirigeant, c'est parce que ce dirigeant gère mal. Et il est hors de question qu'on puisse se dire qu'il faut impérativement qu'on déloge les militaires qui ont pris le pouvoir au profit d'un dirigeant qui gère mal sa population. Je ne pense pas que ce soit normal. Et je soutiens vraiment l'action des pays voisins au Niger, de s'allier au Niger et pour combattre les autres, les Européens. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. And that's a good point to end us. Let us support Niger, you know, and this is very interesting because Ayebere talked about the need to actually have African solution to African problems. And once again, I am going to open the floor just for one comment and one question. And please, it has to be an English minute because the African minute can be 10, you know. So one comment, one question, and then we wrap it up. And continue engaging on our social media platforms. On Facebook, it's at Africans Rising. On Instagram, Africans Rising. Twitter, Africans Rising. LinkedIn, Africans Rising. We definitely share some of these reflections that we've discussed today because they are very, crucial to building the Pan-African solidarity that we want. I'm going to give it to Dr. Victor Okai. And then Ruben, I don't know, you'll have to tell me whether this is a new hand or an old hand. But please, Dr. Vikai, go first, and you have exactly 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone that has contributed so far. A lot of deep insights, and particularly getting insights from within Niger itself. What I would like to say to my French brothers is the time has come for our liberation as Africans, and there is no way that the interests of the West will ever align with our best interest. And with what has started, the awareness has to be there. We need to keep sensitizing our people and our leadership, and especially at the EU, who are highly compromised. This is a place where they are getting subventions from agencies like the EU and the rest of them. And so we have a proverb in Nigeria that it is bad manners to talk while eating. What it simply means is when you are being corrupted, you keep your mouth shut. They do it with civil society, they do it with journalists, and they do it with our leaders, which is why a lot of our leaders will sell out and then allow them to come and operate military bases, take our resources and all that. But we cannot keep quiet. What you're doing is a great initiative. We have to keep talking. We have to keep sensitizing our people, but we've got to take back our Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. An African liberation is needed. I totally agree with you. I don't know who else's hand was up. Ruben, is this a new hand or an old hand? I think
thank you very much, Anne. My hand is up, and I will say there are many problems we are facing as Africa, and what we need, the number one solution, is to unite and act as one voice. For example, when you see Niger in trouble as it is, and then Nigeria is threatening to attack, it's really unfortunate. It is fighting a brother for the benefit of the other. When we work together as one, we shall solve our problems. And the challenge we have when you rise as one country to oppose, then they will fight against you. They will exploit, they will give exploitative incentives, then they will sponsor dissidents and they overthrow. But when we focus on African Union and we speak as one voice, they cannot overthrow the whole of Africa. So we need to have one voice, support each other, and stand together against these advances. And we need to empower our private sector to be able, instead of accepting these multinationals that come and exploit us. And of course, such like Africans Rising and other think tanks need to be supported, because, and you need to, when you are supported, you'll help us to make noise and mobilize and create awareness. And when we are awake and we are speaking and standing, we shall make an impact. But now Nigeria is fighting alone, another one will fight alone, then it will be defeated like we saw in Libya. I pray that we would work together as a team and as Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for saying that, because collective solidarity, there is a Kiswahili proverb that says kidole kimoja hakivunji chawa na umoja ni nguvu. It says that one finger cannot kill a mouse, and that unity is strength. And I think this is what we need. Ubuntu will not be a philosophy just on paper. You know, it needs to be lived within our day-to-day lives in how we interact with each other as Africans. And allow me to just recap some of the thoughts that we talked about this evening, and for those who it's morning. So we heard about the context of what is happening in Niger and Gabon. We also had bit of historical events to the history of coups within Africa. And we also looked at the implication that this has on the general population. And we talked about lack of social amenities such as electricity. We even went further and looked at the implication this has on women. And we talked about, you know, some of the other ECOSOC rights that are challenged. We talked about criminalization, you know, of the right to protest, because Dr. Wada talked about people being arrested because of voicing their opinion. And in general, what even this means to the civil society, for example, because then it means, you know, the right to association, the freedom of association, all this, the civic space is constantly shrinking because of the happenings that are actually going on within the continent. And I think what this calls for is the need to organize better in a more structured way, and especially in terms of collective Pan-African solidarity. I do not have to sit here and wait until something happens to Uganda for me to wake up and say, oh, by the way, Uganda is actually bordering Kenya, you know, on this other part. And even if I'm from East Africa, how am I, you know, able to support what is happening within the West Africa on the SADC region? And I want to thank you, to say a big thank you to my panelists. Thank you so much, you know, Dr. Wada and Astrid Mezang, and even you, Ayebere, for just contextualizing all this and bringing in all these perspectives. Merci beaucoup tout le monde for your submission, and even for you. I know there are so many comments on the chat box that I couldn't read, but we are very grateful that you're able to, connect from the different parts, of Africa. I saw Cameroon, I saw, Sierra Leone, I even saw Swaziland. I mean, there's so many of you. I wish we could go through the chat box, but we are not able to. And I think in my parting shot, before I give it to Hadi, who will give closing remarks and wrap it up for us, I would just like to say that we need to organize collectively so that we stop having scattered efforts. And even when it comes to humanitarian support, necessarily, they don't have to be our country people. We are not going to rise if we do it alone. We are not going to rise if I do it in Kenya and somebody else does it in Tanzania or Burkina Faso. But then we must just work together towards this. And the Agenda 2063 of the African we want and the African we deserve is only going to come when the private sector, civil society, and everybody else work in unison. And of course, our governments, our African governments have the power to actually stop the austerity measures, because these are the people who, are asked to sign on whether we start having structural adjustment programs or not. So how best do we also try to shift this kind of power to the citizens so that we hold those who we elect accountable on matters like this? Thank you so much for having me. Once again, my name is Anrose Osamba, and I coordinate the East African Engagement for Africans Rising. Asanteni sana, merci beaucoup tout le monde, and let me hand it to Hadi, who will say closing remarks and his final thoughts, and then we call this an evening. Thank you. Hadi, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Anne, and everyone. What an enlightening and insightful discussion this has been. And I think 1 hour proved not to be very enough or sufficient for such a rich discussion. What I can say is that we definitely need follow-up conversations, because we are not just talking. We want to see how we can mobilize solidarity across the borders. Now, if ECOWAS is threatening military action in Niger, what are the consequences of that military action? And Dr. Nafiu has already told us about the consequences of the sanctions against that the civilians are bearing the brunt of. A military action would only exacerbate the program, the problems that we have. So we need to be able to show solidarity from across, whilst also being able to critically analyze these coups in their own substance and quality, to understand how we do not end up trusting blindly those who kicked out the oppressors only to become the oppressors themselves. As somebody has referred to what we've seen in the past in terms of military regimes themselves. So thank you all very much. You would be getting information on the follow-up discussions, and then any actions that will come out of this in terms of the solidarity actions that we may be organizing would be as well, shared with all the participants and the general public, so that we move together as African people. Thank you so much. Africans Rising would continue to help to build that solidarity, and it is only in unison as African people, it's only in unity that we can achieve what we've set for ourselves. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. See you next time.
Thank you so much, Hadi, once again for those closing remarks. And also thank you once again to our speakers. I know we have not exhausted the conversation, like Hadi said, and we'll definitely want to, pick up the conversation. And I'm going to take this opportunity to also welcome you to be members of Africans Rising. Africans Rising is a movement for, all Black people in the world. And so if you go to www.africansrising, you will be able to click on where they say how to become a member. And also we are currently running a campaign called the Borderless Africa campaign, where we are saying we need to open the borders and make it easy for brothers and sisters to, access the borders. And so you could sign up to be part of that Borderless Africa campaign, because then it goes a long way to, strengthen the solidarity and the cross-border ties and sharings and learnings and all these things. I would like to thank all of you once again for joining. And we would definitely be in touch with you, since we have your email, by the virtue of the fact that you had to register first. And I know Prince will put a link for the website on the chat box. And on behalf of the entire Africans Rising team, good evening. For those it's evening, good afternoon, and bonjour, tout le monde, asanteni sana, kwaheri. We would like to call this an evening. Thank you. God bless you all. God bless Africa. Africa moja, Africa huru.